So beginning in September 2020, from the time your child turns 2.5 to the time they can enter kindergarten, you'll no longer have to pay for them to attend all-day licensed childcare.
That was Kathleen Jezebel Cowperthewaite Wynne, unfortunately the Premier of Ontario, hopefully Premier of Ontario for only a few more days, only hopefully for a few more months. The Ontario general election is on June, I think June 7th. I have endorsed Doug Ford, the man of the people. In fact, I would go so far to say that Doug Ford and the PCs are the only other political party, major political party, other than the Liberals, that are running. The NDP is not running this year. The NDP is not running. You heard it right here on the Arana Nation. The reason I say the Ontario NDP are not running is because the NDP have completely uh, dismissed their grassroots populist beginnings and have become a puppet, a secret, albeit puppet, of the Ontario Liberals. They vote probably 90%, conservatively 75% of the time with the Ontario Liberals in legislature. They will not want to admit it, and especially during an election time, they fight with the Liberals like a dog fights with a cat, but secretly they vote, and they vote lock, stock, and barrel with the Liberals in the legislature. That's just the simple fact. So they bear a lot of the responsibility with what has occurred in Ontario in terms of high hydro rates, the loss of jobs, and our ballooning debt. And I'm going to be talking about the debt, but first I want to talk about why people in Ontario really would be completely stupid and foolish to, now that Kathleen Wynne has given all this money to childcare and education and healthcare, why you all would be foolish to completely forget all the things that she has done prior to this election eve budget, this big old spending, what she's done prior to that. Y'all just will forget all about that and say, well, she's given us all this money now, so let's forget about the high hydro rates. Let's forget about all the loss of jobs. Let's forget about the high taxes. Let's forget about the high cost of living and people having their hours cut in Ontario. Let's forget about all of that. She's the most unpopular premier that Canada has probably ever had, and we'll just forget all about it because she's given us a little bit more government gifts, even though as I will mention, this is only adding to our debt. And if you continue to add to the debt like this, Ontario is the most indebted subregion of any subregion in the world. We have the most debt out of any province, state, or region of the world. And if the debt continues to go up, we are going to end up at a point where we're paying more of our taxes on the interest on that debt than on our social programs like healthcare, education, infrastructure. We could just forget about infrastructure. We could forget about healthcare. We can forget about all that stuff, childcare. You can forget about all those goodies. Eventually, we will be paying more of our tax dollars on paying the interest on our debt. And if you miss the interest on a debt, well, you're in deep shit. That's just put it that way. Excuse my language. I hope YouTube doesn't try and demonetize me now. But I want to talk about something before we get into all that. Well, let's take a look at the Liberals' record when it comes to being a kind-hearted sweetie pie, giving money to people who are disadvantaged in terms of health care, in terms of child care, in terms of education. Let's look at that record. And by the way, I'm a populist. So I do believe in helping the little guy. I believe in making sure that people are empowered economically, who can grow and become more independent, all that stuff. I do agree that wealth should be, distributed into a certain extent, not in a socialistic type of way, because I'm a populist social credit conservative. That's how you can describe me. But I am not in favor of adding money to the debt as a way of doing it. I believe we need to spend what we have. But let's take a look at this. Ontario kids with autism, aged 5 and older, cut off from government-paid therapy. Autism doesn't end when you're 5, PC leader Patrick Brown says. Now, this was 2 years ago, April the 5th, 2016. The Ontario Liberals cut autistic children aged 5 and older off of government-paid therapy. And this is coming straight from the CBC. Ontario children with autism aged 5 or older no longer qualify for government-funded intensive therapy, a move critics say is leaving many families in the lurch. The Liberal government announced a new Ontario autism program with $333 million in funding, but changes include limiting intensive behavioral intervention to children between 2 and 4. So that's a cut to healthcare, I would say. Cutting on our most vulnerable people. I mean, they think autism somehow ends when you're 5. They somehow think that you're more independent when you're 5. I would say that it gets worse after 5. You're older, you become stronger, you're in school, you're surrounded by more unfamiliar circumstances, you get more nervous. I think autism affects people even more after 5. But the Liberals didn't seem to think so. But that was back when the election was still far away. And we're going to soon later see even more cuts. So pressure on Ontario to cut the cuts on hospital funding. Well, Ontario Health Coalition says it will be putting pressure on the provincial government this fall to cut the cuts being made to hospital funding. And this comes to us August the 9th, 2017. Executive Director of the coalition, Natalie Mara, says Hamilton's hospitals are at a crisis point. And I would say that Hamilton would be the worst place for hospitals to be at a crisis point, because I lived in Hamilton for a long time, and I know that there is a lot of problems in Hamilton when it comes to even mental health and all that other different stuff. I mean, I'm not trying to bash the city. I'm not trying to bash the city. It's just I'm telling you the truth. So really, this is a crisis. For the last 4 years, hospital funding has been frozen at 0%, increasing, Mara said, as inflation runs at 2%, population growth runs at 1%, aging adds 1%, and then there's increased utilization, which is about 1%. So just to maintain operating levels, hospitals need that 5% increase. So what's strange to me is that Ontario has managed to rack up the largest debt of any sub-region on the planet Earth. And yet we are making cuts to our healthcare. We are cutting services for autistic children aged 5 and older. And now nurses warn of increased risk of patients dying due to hospital cuts and layoffs from the Ontario provincial government. Comes to us October 22nd, 2015. Let's read this from Global News. The Ontario Nurses Association warns hospital patients are at increased risk of dying because of cuts to registered nursing positions across the province, but the government insists the ill are being cared for. They insist, all right. Union President Linda Haslam-Stroud says the Liberals may say they hired 24,000 nurses since they were first elected in 2003, but reality is 625 registered nursing positions have been cut in Ontario this year, mainly at hospitals. That's also dangerous because when an immigrant wants to come to Canada, the first place they sit themselves down is Ontario, and people get sick from all over the world. And of course, the Mac Daddy's bringing in refugees. He's even saying people with infectious diseases, we're not going to discriminate against them. They can come on in. So the Ontario Liberals are cutting nurses at a time when we need nurses the most, and yet we have the largest debt of any sub-region on the planet Earth. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Hospital budgets have been flatlined for 4 years, so only the most difficult and complex patients are admitted, and that requires more nurses, added Haslam Stroud. Well, let's look at education. Have they done any better with education? I don't think so. Ontario Liberals to cut $500 million from education. Some schools in Ontario will be shut down as the Liberal government makes education funding cuts to help eliminate a $12.5 billion deficit in 3 years, Education Liz Sandals admitted Tuesday. The planned cuts are included in the government's 2015-16 education funding guide, which was obtained by the New Democrats and calls for permanent savings of up to $500 million by 2017-18. And then the minister responsible says, let's face it, we do have a deficit, so we're going to have a look at every government program and make sure that we're managing it efficiently. No, you're not managing it efficiently. Managing it efficiently would mean using the money that you have and using it wisely and cutting off the fat out of government, cutting the waste and the fraud and the abuse and using the money efficiently. But that's not what you're doing. You're cutting. Look what you're doing with healthcare. Look what you're doing with autism. Hallway healthcare, as Doug Ford likes to say. I know of schools. I have a cousin who goes to a school that doesn't even have a cafeteria. And this is Ontario, the province with the largest sub-regional debt of any freaking sub-region in the world. So where is that money going? It's obviously not going to fix the deficit or to pay down the debt because our debt has just grown. We have the largest debt of any sub-region in the bloody world. So the debt's not being taken care of. Some Ontario schools go silent as music programs are defunded. Number of music teachers at Ontario schools has fallen in the last decade, report says. The number of Ontario elementary schools with full or part-time music teachers has steadily declined in the last decade, according to a new report released Monday, and some who study childhood education warn the loss of music lessons could have onerous consequences for new generation of students. Oh, but we can spend money to teach children that there are more than two genders, which we are doing in the province of Ontario, and teach them about anal sex and about clitorises and G-strings. Whatever. Oh, I hope I didn't say it wrong. I don't know. I guess that's what it was. All that other stuff, G-spot, whatever it's called. All that other stuff. We can teach them all that sexual stuff with the radical sex education. But we have to cut the music. We have to cut the music classes for them. That's the province of Ontario for you. So, my friends in Ontario, if you are smart, you will not automatically see Ontario doing this, promising all this different stuff, education spending, healthcare spending. You're going to be smart and say, no, the Liberals have done so much damage to Ontario. They have cut so much. They have done so much damage that I'm not going to fall for this again. Now, the NDP is no better because, as I said, they have voted with the Liberals a lot of times. They are partly responsible for the issues that have taken place in Ontario. I've endorsed Doug Ford. He's a man of the people. He's a people's man. He gives out his phone number, for crying out loud. He has a record of helping the little guy. He has a record of it. His whole family has a record of helping the little guy. He gives out his phone number. You would have access to the second most powerful person in Canada, the Premier of Ontario. This is the Arana Nation.